Whoa. Cool dragon. Welcome, everybody, to Campaigns and Conquest. My name is Magenta, and I'm your co host. And joining us today, as always, is your host, Storm. That was a really cool dragon you greeted us with. Awesome.
Just playing around with some ideas for some different beginnings and, trying to add some bells and whistles and such. So, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, you guys may be noticing difference in our backgrounds too. So we've got a little bit of an upgrade here because we're going to be focusing on paracosmic convergence, and specifically for this one is going to be a fantasy based theme based on the map that some of you may be familiar with, where we created our world. So we're kind of building on that. So we're going back to the Empire of Calton in this case, and Storm is going to walk us through how we create a new character. Now, we've already kind of done some of this in the background because I'm indecisive and we didn't want you to have to sit through listening to me go, while I decide. So we have a character already kind of, we've gone through the process, but we're going to walk you through how we did it, what the steps are, and why the character's created that way. So, um, I'm sorry, you okay?
I did, I gave the Obama. Sorry. I was pushing up my glasses and I did this.
Oh, I
Everybody thinks I
wondered what
flicked.
I thought I had done something
I
wrong.
was like, whoa.
Sorry. Um, I wish we were able to present this to you live because we do always love to get feedback. But due to some schedule changes that I've had at work, unfortunately, my time for live is not the same anymore. We're going to try and get to where I can schedule something in and find a day that works. If you would like to suggest a day that works for you as a viewer, please feel free to comment and put your choice in there. We'll take a look at the comment section and maybe get an idea. Also, do want to suggest Monday as a possible option because that is a day that I have free. I'm also off on Sundays, so if that's something that would work for folks, but we do have a schedule on Sunday. Something I want to mention is actually our original D&D game that goes on Sundays, which if anyone is interested in joining, you can find information on our Discord. Storm, do you want to give the Discord information or make that available for folks, anyone who might be interested in joining the Greyhawk game that you have running Sundays at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time?
We'll put the link in the description below.
Fantastic. So, yeah, and everybody is welcome to join that. So Sundays we could do like earlier than that. Later, well, those kind of tend to run a little bit. We get into it sometimes, and so we're probably not going to be able to do an evening session because of that pre-existing game that's going on, which is a lot of fun. So, anyone who's interested in joining on that, you're definitely welcome. But let's get to the paracosmic convergence player character creation. So, Storm, do you want to start us off with the basics and kind of describe what we'll be doing through the process?
Yeah. So we'll be using the the world that we created in previous lives as the campaign world in which this character is going to be created. We'll go through the different steps, explain how it's done for the Paracosmic Convergence PC game, PC creation for the game. Wow. Whoops.
It's not a PC game unless you want to play it over PC, like
Yes.
tabletop, or you want to play it, if you're a GM
Well,
or a DM, you want to play it that way, or even just through Discord. We've actually in the past played with the Star Wars Ash Worlds campaign that we were doing. We did on phone, just Discord on the phone, just walking through it. So that's an option too. So however you like to play, you can do that if it's on, if it involves a PC or if it's in person, whatever your pleasure. But this is player character creation that we're doing today. So um, you've got some visuals to kind of share with us of the process. We can maybe go over the steps briefly and then get into the details.
I have instruction, yeah, so you can read along, like picture pages.
Yeah, if you want to read along or just to see the basic outline, and then we'll go through each step one by one, and I'll share with you what I've already come up with for my characters, so you can see that too if you like. So we have a couple basic instructions here, a couple of pages. Unfortunately, our title of the show is kind of blocking some portion of this. I don't know if you can move that window up or make that smaller, but um, we're going to be starting with obviously picking a name, as most places. There we go. That works good. So Storm, you want to lead the way?
Okay. First and foremost, the obvious starting point for everybody is pick a name.
Which I did pick a name for my character, and her name is Sabella Abati.
Okay. All righty. Um, Next, we have the birthplace, which we've already had you pick up. Oops, there we go.
There we
Now you
go.
can
That's
somewhat
better.
see it. Pretty much dead center of the screen is the country in question here that she wanted to.
Yes, my birthplace is the Empire of Calton. And Calton, I don't know how many folks watching now are familiar with Canton or the creation that we did before, but there's a couple of countries that border Calton. You can see the one down to the south of it here, which is pronounced Vitangera, because the W's are pronounced as V's in this world. And it means the belly of the dragon. It is the place where all of the foods are grown, grains and everything that feed the livestock that the dragons depend on for the kingdom of Voda there, that little island in the water floating around, that feeds them to the dragons. So that is a very mystical, they have a very strong magical religious tradition in Vitangera. Very superstitious peoples, and they worship the religion of the dragon. So they have at some points in the history taken over Canton. The on the other side, and you kind of can't see it because Storm is blocking it a little bit, but the country to the west of Calton there is called Brixia, and they are in fact quite opposed to any kind of magic. They believe that the dragons are a menace and that the reason the dragons exist is because of the superstitions and magical behaviors of other people. So, if they find out you have any magical ability or any magical inclinations at all, they are going to like set you on fire, basically. So they are. They don't play with magic. They don't like it. They don't want it in their country. They have also conquered Canton or Calton. So as a result, um, that country has become one that is very opposed to any kind of religious, any kind of dogma. There are some people who are holdovers who either have no love for magic or are still part of the Vitangera belief system. So you have a mix, but officially they are a more of a secular kind of they're done. They don't want any parts of any of that stuff because it's causing them nothing but strife. So that's a little bit about that world, and that's where my character comes from. And I've been pronouncing it wrong all this time. I've been calling it Canton. It's actually Calton. I'm going to make a correction to how I'm writing everything here. But anyway, so Storm, you want to go on? So now we've got my character's name, Sabella Abati, and she is from Calton.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Next is picking the character class,
And I
which
have
is
this. Oh, go ahead.
just going to clarify for people who are unfamiliar in the fantasy portion of this Paracosmic Convergence, which can uh, play anything, any genre. but we're doing fantasy here, and in the fantasy side of things, it's very BX like, very that type of thing. You have uh, a rogue, uh, cleric, um, mage, fighter, and then you have races class with gnomes, elves, and dwarves. So she's picking mage, and she's focused
I'm
on. Well, we'll get to that, but
I'm
go ahead.
I'm human. I'm a human mage.
Hmm. Yep. So um, the next is the little bit different. I do that.
Here, let me if you don't mind, let me kind of share my screen here so you can see the character and we can just kind of follow along if that works.
Okay. All right then. Go right ahead.
Alrighty. Are you able to see?
It's a very thin rectangular Excel like sheet, but oh, now there, you got a big old cursor.
I do, and that's because I am like kind of blind. But anyway, there we go. Does that work for you?
MrMagoo.com. Yeah, now
What's
it's
that?
very MrMagoo.com.
Yeah. Sorry, I can make it bigger if you want. So it's a little easier to see if everybody likes that. But there is the details, and there's the picture of my character. You can kind of see why she's only got one pant leg will be explained later. But anyway, so she's a mage
Hmm.
ready to do some damage with the magic.
Hmm. Hmm. All righty. And the next part is social class. I like to have characters
Oh,
determine social class. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
sorry. You skipped over alignment. Just wanted to point out we have alignment here, and I chose neutral for my alignment because I'm just not sure if I want to be good or bad.
Okay. Um, uh, Social class is
Mhm.
about choosing where you fit in society, and each each thing has a or each country has its own society, own culture, and you see how you fit within it. In that, if you're of lower social standing, you won't be received well necessarily by somebody whom is higher. You know, the noble looking down upon the peasant, as it were, that sort of thing. So the
Mhm.
other thing that social class does is it determines how much money you start with, and it also determines your literacy uh, and other parts of your education. So it's very key to the construction of the character.
And for this, when Storm first started describing this to me, my first response was, I want to be queen. But as with real life, you really don't get to choose so much yourself. It is chosen for you by the luck of the draw. So there is a process of rolling for what class you get. You want to describe how that works?
Right. You roll a d8, and that gives you a uh, social standing, that the lowest being slave or escaped slave, and moves through being a criminal, working class, middle class, uh, which is there's a like a basically blue collar versus white collar type of middle class. There's the moneyed class, which are craftsmen, merchants, millers, innkeepers. There's a learned class, which are scholars, mages, priests, just as examples. Then there's minor nobility, which are gentry, knights, government officials, courtesans, things like that nature. And then there's major nobility, which are counts, barons, senators, guild masters. And the final is greater nobility, where you're a general or an admiral or maybe a duke, some uh, uh, form of royalty, the emperor, whatever it is.
You might even be in line for the throne, depending on what you get in that case. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, I rolled, and I was fortunate enough to get minor nobility.
Mm-hmm. Puts so she's a, was rose up a courtesan or is a courtesan as she, and that gives you a chance to be literate. And I said literate. This isn't like other games where you just go, okay, well, how many languages do I speak? You might not be literate in any of them. So
I mean, you'll speak a language, but you might not be able to read and write in any language. You might be having to rely on interpreters. And yeah, did you read that message I got from my mother accurately, or are you messing with me? I can see how that would be kind of difficult to deal with.
right,
But
I wanted that people to feel that there's a chance that you might have to navigate a world where that seemingly basic thing may not exist in your education. So, uh, yeah, it's, imagine that. Imagine having to ask people, "Hey, what's the price of this? What's the menu? Read. You can't." So, it can be inconvenient to say the least. Um, then there is a chance of language. Most humans will speak a version of common. The chances of that are very great, but not 100%. I always like the idea of having an outside chance of something rare. Um, there's also a chance that a human might speak a second, more ethnic language, more localized dialect, or a completely different language. And those are percentile chances. So you just go from there. Um, with her, she got lucky. She did get literacy, um, no second language, so she is literate in common, and that's it. Okay.
makes sense. Common is going to be the language most often spoken for trade, for diplomacy, by the majority of people. Um, Everybody's going to speak common and then maybe something else. But in my case, I probably didn't have to learn to speak other languages because
Yes. Yeah.
I had servants and other people to do those kinds of things for me. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this is going to be so weird playing a character that has all these advantages. It's not at all like my real life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the point is kind of take you out of your comfort zone and try something different. Um,
Mhm.
the next part of social class, once you've gotten literacy, is how much money. And no, you don't all start with the same amount of money or even the same potential for money. A lot of games, like original Dungeons and Dragons, you had, I think it was 3d6, um, and that was it. Here, pardon me, so sorry, my apologies, old men. Um, it depends on your social standing. Of course, it will be higher based on how high your social standing is. If you're a slave or escaped slave, you don't have any money. Now, folks, um, it is meant to put people at different levels. Some people are going to become very upset at this idea and go, "Well, yeah, if I rolled up a slave, I wouldn't want to play. I'm at such a disadvantage." But the role play, it's very heavily role play orientated. So and it is a challenging game. It isn't meant to be simple, but there are ways to compensate for your lack of money as a slave or something like that. And we'll get to that. So, but no, you're not all necessarily on an even field. Um, so anyway, uh, up from there, uh, a criminal may have some money in his pocket from his last score. A working class, even a lower class, might have a little bit of a coin purse based on their labor. And then as you get higher, you get very fat purses. Now, this isn't uh, your family fortune that you have access to. You're not going to be able to walk into a Green Goths. Um, you've decided to go adventuring for whatever purpose, for whatever reason, and you'll take a coin purse with you relative to the social status that you have. So that's what we're doing here with beginning money. So with Magenta, her character at a minor nobility rolls a 6d6 and multiplies it by 10, which means she can have quite a bit of money. Um, Unfortunately, she didn't roll that great. She didn't roll horrible, but it wasn't that great. She ended up with 180 gold pieces. So there's that. Any questions? Was that clear, concise? No? You
I feel like it was clear and concise. Now I've gone through it. Unfortunately, we're not able to get the kind of feedback that we normally do. But if you find anything about the process
I
we're going
forgot we're
through,
not live.
yeah, we're not live. Sorry about that. But and if you find along this, if you want to jot it down in the comment section and post it, we will be checking those after this has been out for a while and has some views, so we can kind of see you know what might need to be addressed maybe in a part two or in another when we do have a chance to schedule a live. So please do share what your feelings are on, if there's a time of day on Monday that's good for you, or if, early on Sunday afternoon's good. Um, I could even do Saturday afternoon because I don't work. I work just a half a day on Saturday, but it would have to be early in the day. But anyway, don't want to get too distracted on that. So moving along, because I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory from here. The next thing we've got is the class is going to come with some skills
Yes.
depending on
As you
which class you're in. So
right. To go back right back to talking about the slave or escaped slave. Um, yes, you don't have any money, but you start out with a couple of things. Each character, or excuse me, each social standing starts with 5 uh, skills. Uh, with slave or escape slave, there's stealth for avoiding detection and capture. If you're an escape slave, what if you're not an escape slave? Well, you may still have developed a way of kind of blending in or not being seen for a variety of reasons. Survival, obviously, essential skills to live on the run. So it's really geared towards an escape slave. To start as a slave is, like I say, I'm not one for being super balanced. I like the idea of different things, but starting as a slave is pretty much people feel like they'd be condemned. Now, there's certain storylines or certain situations where a GM may want you to start as a slave. But I think in general, if you roll this up as a random, you're going to call yourself an escape slave for obvious reasons. My West End Games Star Wars, if I were to use this system instead, which I would next time, my Star Wars campaign, everybody would start as a slave, as their prisoner. So, um, anywho,
and
you have
just for the record, Cowtown in this world does not believe in slavery. They're a more
there's another thing. You would
yeah.
have to it'd have to be somewhere um, where slavery is, you know. So in practice. So anyway, so we've got stealth, survival. Next one is endurance, and that's a fairly easy explanation. It's a hard life being a slave, and you would be able to withstand conditions and long labor because what choice would you have? Um, Empathy. You certainly learn
Mm.
that for your fellow slaves. Um, so sense others' emotions. That allows you to build alliances and relationships with others more easily. And
Mhm.
lastly, pickpocketing, because you ain't got no money. So,
I do have a question for you because I know in some of this, and some of this is relevant specifically to the kingdom of Voda. With the way that Voda works, they are constantly looking for people to work in the fields of or with the livestock, actually, in the lake of the zealous converts, where they have um, I'm sorry, I can't read it right now, but it's that the embers of the sacred flames. That's what it was. So there's a lot of people who are get rounded up and get sent there because Voda is looking for people to, make sure that they're having a sacrifice or offering to make for the dragons once every 12 years. So those folks are kind of prisoners, but they're really slaves. I mean, they didn't end up there because they actually committed any crimes. In a lot of cases, they would have just been put there because it's a necessity for that society and their belief system. So um, that's kind of where a lot of this, where you're going to find that in this story. So just to kind of give you a little backstory, I always like to bring it back to the world creation too, because in this case, it's really a big part of where a lot of these options come from when you're playing the game with the different characters and the different, where you were born, your origin, that kind of thing.
mhm, mhm. So uh, there's several. So there's 8 social classes. Just to, for the sake of brevity, and we won't go through them all, but they they evolve based on the elevation. Just to keep things going, so you get the gist. We'll do one, number two, and a lower criminal class, a rogue, a pirate, a gypsy, something like that. They have disguise, they have bluff. They tend to be con artists even when they're not directly committing crimes. Um, Lock picking, ambush, sleight of hand. So, and as you get up, we won't do them all, but we'll round off with what she starts with at minor nobility, which is leadership, sword fighting, etiquette, heraldry, and diplomacy. Leadership is about commanding troops, largely. Um, Sword fighting should be self explanatory, etiquette as well. Master of courtly manners inside, when you're having balls and doing all the social hoity toity things that these folks would do. You would, use etiquette. Um, Very good in diplomacy situations, although you do have diplomacy itself as a negotiating on behalf of your faction. And you would have, or you do have heraldry, which is knowledge of family crests and symbols throughout the campaign world. Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are reading along, if you're looking at the sheet that I'm showing on the screen here too, you might notice that I have equestrian instead of sword fighting. And that's one of those with this there are guidelines for this, and they should be, as whenever possible, you kind of want to stick to those as closely as you can. But in some cases, as you're creating a character, there can be things that might change something to where the normal doesn't really fit. And for my character, in her case, sword fighting, not really a thing with her. So equestrian is what she has in its place. And that's something that Storm and I kind of worked out together as we were creating the character, as part of the story progressed, and it made sense. We got to, you'll see as we go down along the list, where it comes into where equestrian horse riding skills make more sense for this character than the sword fighting would.
This is the first time we've done any of these kind of instructional videos, so pardon us if there's a little bit of a ham-fistedness to it. I did forget to tell you that it is um, the this system of character creation benefits heavily from being done in coordination with your GM. I foresee, if you're going to play this game, the best way to have a character creation is to do it like a pre-game or session zero, as some people like to use it, and sit down and hammer out these kinds of things together with your GM. So, uh, anyway, next on the list for things to get done in your character creation, once you've gotten that, um, with your social standing, you have dependents, and dependents are can be family members. They may not be. They're exactly what the word would imply. There's some people that depend on you, whether it be for emotional assistance, for financial assistance, or some other symbiotic, or sometimes leeching. You might have that deadbeat brother that you just can't stop giving money to because he's still your brother, even if he's a deadbeat or whatever it is. Your Jimmy Carter had a brother that everybody kind of, there's always that kind of relationship. So there's you roll for that, and you roll twice to come up with two different headings. And obviously, if you get the same roll twice, re-roll, because there is no duplicates in this. So there's a list of 20 types of dependents. Um, and again, they're and relatives, friends and or relatives that you still see on a regular basis and whom depend on you in some way. You may be close. They may need financial support. They might think of, if you're a veteran and one of your army buddies is down on his luck or is having a hard time, you know, getting back into society, you might have ways of supporting him, be it emotionally or financially, or maybe a little bit of both. Just another example, something like that. They may need your supervision and or protection or emotional support. They may uh, you may have some obligation towards them legally or through honor. Maybe it's somebody who saved your father and now they're sick, and I mean, there's 100 different ways you can explain it, but you just you work with the GM or you come up with something yourself to explain as to what they are, and this is done for purposes of devices during the game. Magenta.
Well, yes, and in my case, the dependents that I have a mentor who taught me everything that I know about arcane lore. In this case, his name is Morel Finnegan, and he's a gnome. So that is a dependent. I'm responsible for paying him back, paying his salary and wages for the what he's done for me. And he's um an elderly mentor, so he does require my help, and
Yes,
then
I
of
understand.
course. Hmm?
Mhm. Yeah, that says I understood it. He was old, and because he's an old friend and a teacher, you help him with money,
I
keeping
owe
him
him a
afloat.
debt and I help him with money, yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's my obligations to my father and mother. In this case, because I am a minor noble, um, I have to carry on the family line. They are expecting me to marry well and, enhance the family status as all nobility is looking to do. That's kind of part of the game, I guess. So I have some
Mhm.
obligations there. Um, which, since considering that I'm going to be going off adventuring, they might be a bit disappointed with me, but that's where we're at with them.
So most depend. Well, I shouldn't say most. Uh, Dependents can provide you with a skill, maybe something they taught, like mother and father, teach you things as you grow up. So they would provide one skill that you can choose that fits. Sometimes not. If you're dealing with maybe your drinking buddies are just that. They're cool drinking buddies, but they're not ones for the learning so they don't really have anything to teach you other than how to do a shot or something like that. So, but in her case, a mentor obviously has taught you something. That's what mentor means. Your parents tend to teach you more than one thing, but we had her pick something that her mother and father taught her as a skill. They what were they, Magenta? I believe that the father it
Mhm,
was alchemy, the mother was
mhm. Herb lore.
herb lore.
Mhm.
She was a hobbyist in tending a garden.
Well, because and Cowtown is actually a country that's one of their exports is herbs and wine and herbs, that kind of thing. That's kind of what they do. Um,
Mhm. The businessmen they come and they dig the herb and drink the wine.
right.
Little Jimi Hendrix half-ass reference there. So, and the father taught her alchemy,
Hmm.
and so he was obviously or is in the business or hobbyist in alchemy or whatever it is to have that uh, taught to her. So,
Which obviously, considering the nature of Cowtown, its divided nature, my family is going to fall on the side of learning and the mystical arts and all of that. Cowtown is one of the places in the world where they do have their other main claim to fame is kind of they have a lot of universities and learning some early science, not exactly like the alchemy would be that sciencey aspect for them that some other nations don't really embrace so much. But yeah,
mhm. So these work out, and as always, it's best to do this in uh, the presence of your GM. Make sure that everything fits with their campaign concept, and have every choice accepted by them. You know, so
right. Because like if I rolled all this up and I tried to choose arcane lore and alchemy and herb lore as skills, and I was from Brixia, well, that's just a recipe one way trip to the to a pile of burning wood. So that's
yeah,
that
Brixia is
wouldn't be something that would have, huh?
yeah. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Brixie would just kill me on the spot for any of those things, so
Yeah,
it wouldn't be something that would work in that context if that's where my character came from.
they believe that magic is a destructive force, and they kill people that use magic. They're witch burning big time.
Right, because they believe if they get rid of the magical folk, they'll get rid of the dragons, and the dragons are a problem for everyone, except for the people who worship the dragons, of course, who love it.
Mm-hmm. So there is a well, you pick your gods as well as part of your development. She chose not to have any as far as gods worshipped. She believes that there are gods. She believes in other people's gods. She just doesn't. She also, how did it go? You believe that if you worship them, then you become beholden to their whims and commands, and therefore she wants. Am I describing it
Right.
properly? Yeah.
Right. She doesn't want to disrespect the gods that others believe in and worship, but she doesn't want any part of worship herself because to do so, well, and this is kind of part of with Calton, picking a side, you're going to make half the country mad no matter what. So so she's kind of avoiding, and I guess you would say agnostic would be the best way to say that. She doesn't want to commit to anything or devote herself to a god because it wouldn't it she's from Calton. It's just not their way.
Okay. Um, the next two things is you have a cultural and a racial bonus. They are assigned. They are not chosen.
Mhm.
Humans have ingenuity. Uh, Her cultural bonus, because Kelton is well, she describes it as a constitutional monarchy. So it's imperial in nature as far as the definitions in the this system goes, and that gives a bonus. Uh, well, it gives a skill with a bonus. What was it?
Intrigue.
Intrigue.
It's in intrigue, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because I'm human, I have the racial bonus of or the is it racial? It would really be species, wouldn't it? But whatever you want to call it, ingenuity because I'm human.
Yeah. Right. So, pardon me. The next is your background. Now, I come up with rolling up a background. There's 100 choices. You can make your own chart if you want, whatever, pick and choose, whittle it down, go with only 20, whatever have you. But the point here is to I don't like the idea of a giant backstory. A lot of people get turned off by that, and they can become problematic in playing because people will write something up in hopes that I've just justified getting 5 levels or a superpower or whatever it is. Not everybody does that. It's not a but what I do is I have you roll this up. It'll give you somewhere to start with. It'll give you a reasonable sized background that can have relevance to the rest of your story, to the rest of the game, without burdening everybody with some novella sized short story about your entire life. So,
Or something that kind of hamstrings and becomes something that drives the story in directions. I've always thought it's funny because I've heard the conversations that people have had about how players don't like it when a GM kind of railroads them in a specific direction. But I think that that is also something that GMs don't like to be railroaded by a character's huge backstory that says, well, I can't really play the game in this way because my character would never do that because of this, page 4 of my backstory says I would never do that. So, yeah, it kind of gives you a backstory that you can have because that's important to have to know what your character's about, what may have affected them, but it's not going to be so dominant that it poses a problem for the other players or for the GM that is trying to create a game, a narrative that might go in places that are contradictory to a long backstory.
right. So, and conversely, I don't like no backstory. I don't like the idea of playing some sort of game that is very video game-ish in that you've just manifested in the local tavern. I'm not down with that. So I like something in between. So this thing gives you that limit. Now, I prefer and strongly recommend that you roll it up. If you have a GM who believes that they want to limit it for whatever reason, um, or they're whatever they're doing just fits better if they can control it, fine. I can't, but I can't stress enough that you be you really should try to stick to randomizing this stuff. So in the case of what she did is she went and got a true love abducted. Now she didn't want to expand very much, so all we've got is the name of her true love that was abducted and the open-ended question: is he dead or not? Now, what that does is it's not just some statement that gets written down and ignored. This is something you can play with, and it's something that your DM can play with too. Maybe he's out there. Maybe it becomes a device that the DM can use to hook you, or or whatever other imaginative way they can think of to incorporate something. And again, this is where people go, "Well, I don't like railroads, so that doesn't matter to me." just because you're playing an open sandbox doesn't mean you can't drop NPCs and stuff like that. I like a kind of hybrid type of thing like that.
Right. Well, and I agree with that too, because I'll tell you, an open sandbox, when you get right down to it, sometimes it's like that blank sheet of paper syndrome, you know? Um, you ever have that assignment from your English teacher for creative writing where they just hand you a blank sheet of paper and just go write something, and you're like, I can't think of anything. And that can happen too. So it's kind of nice to have some starting points, some elements that work with. And also, if you're going to have a character, I kind of like the idea that just like in real life, some of the elements of your character are not in your control. Because if I were going to create this character completely in my control, she'd have nothing but advantages. She'd be better than all the other mages. She wouldn't have any bad problems in her life. But if that were true, she probably wouldn't even be going on an adventure in the first place. Why would she leave her cushy, um, noble home with all her advantages and go off on an adventure?
Mm-hmm.
She'd
Mm-hmm.
probably be staying home doing some needle pointing or learning to dance, finding a good husband,
Right.
whatever.
And that
So,
hmm
mhm,
and that leads us to our next thing. So once you've got background, at least uh, 1 to 3, I can't, again, just before we move on, a lot of people might just go, I'd just rather not do that. You're gutting the idea of this thing if you don't at least give it a try. So, uh, anyway, the next thing is, as you Magenta was talking about, why you doing this? If you come from a cushy background, what would prompt you to abandon it? The background story it may be, or it may just be part of it, but there's also motivations, and they are, why do you do what you do, and what made you become an adventurer.
yeah,
And these motivations help explain that further, or start to explain it if your backstory doesn't. Uh,
right. Well, and I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves because I'm looking at, actually, once we do background, the next thing we talk about is the basic starting traits, is the next thing that I'm showing here that we have. Because I know that's something you do a little bit differently, and I think we probably should talk about that as well, for what those basic starting traits are.
well, yeah, they're
I may
they're
have written it in a wrong order, and I'm sorry if I
yeah,
did, because I made the form. Sorry.
yeah, they're in the wrong order, but that's okay. So your starting traits are just this: you have a wound level, and the wound level is that, I, I guess you could say hit points, but I don't like to use hit points. You have a wound level because you have a combat system that deals with it doesn't. I don't want to count back from 20 points or 12 points or any of that stuff. I find that boring, and I think it's why so many people go, oh, these games are great until you get to combat, and then they take forever and they're complicated, and it's because they're not very interesting. I use, it's all numbers. I use and I'm sure there's differences. Somebody out there can go, well, in this game, blah blah. Yeah, I know. I'm not 100% unique. Nonetheless, the majority of them have some form of hit point, and I don't like that. So I prefer to hear about how I cut my enemy viciously with a executed swing of my sword or something of that nature. So you have a different levels of wounds: superficial, a little deeper, mortal, things like that. So superficial wound is just, yeah, as we all say, it's just a flesh wound. It isn't anything serious. Uh, b- but having one, that's one thing. Having half a dozen, that's other. So the wound level is a kind of a death by 1,000 cuts type of situation.
It's how many wounds you can have before you're incapacitated or possibly fatally injured.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
and the other starting trait is just how far you move when you're in melee and um, situations like that. And if you're long-legged, which is the humans, I also allow for half orcs because of this one thing. Um, but generally, people aren't going to be half orcs. But nonetheless, humans, half orcs, and elves, having the longer legs, have the starting movement um, rating of 6, whereas the little stubby leg folks, the dwarves, the halflings, and the gnomes, they have a 4, and that's in inches. Or if you have a scale that warrants it, centimeters, that's up to you, either or. Or if you have Ken dolls and you play outside, go for feet. If you want. It would be neat to see, but very unpractical. Generally, we're dealing with inches, but when I want a lot of space and I have the right scale, I'll go to centimeters. So either or.
Mhm.
So those are your starting traits.
And they're based on your race, pretty exclusively, but they can be affected by other things that can happen, like what we're getting to next, which is the attributes, which you roll for a certain number of those. Do you want to explain how attributes in your game work?
Yeah, I don't do, again, I try to get away from this boilerplate type of template that goes with the vast majority of these games, especially the fantasy games, where they all seem to be based off of something like BX, D&D. So you have a spread of attributes between 3 and 5. It's randomly determined by picking one and then rolling a D3, which, if you're not familiar with a D3, because you can't really have odd sided dice, but what a D3 is just dividing 1d6. So if you roll a 1 or 2, it's a 1. If you roll a 3 or 4, it's a 2. If you roll a 5 or 6, it's a 3. And then you add 1. So between the picking and that roll, you get a total of between 3 and 5. Uh, and once you have them, you have them. This isn't like other games where some things can knock them out or down or whatever. That really isn't going to happen. There is an exception here or there, but generally, once you have them, you have them. That's it. So you can. What you do is, once you've rolled them, rolled how many you get, there's a chart where you use a 10-sider to randomly determine the ones that you haven't picked. There's always one. You always start with one that you've picked. So I'll just go through them. Number 1 is attractive, and that's exactly about physical things. Your physical appearance. You're a hottie. You're a babe. Whatever. That gives you a +1 to your social interaction type roles. It helps with diplomacy and other types of persuasion and whatever, seduction, if that's your thing, whatever. Number 2 is weird. Not weird like you and I use the word weird, not WEIRD. Weird like old school English weird, WYRD. And what that does for a price is give you uh, 2 extra advantages to pick from, which are kind of bonus. The price is that you have an aura about you that can be detected by certain monsters and certain people, and they're not going to like you because of it. So uh, you're going to be the kind of person that might get picked out by the superstitious as some sort of demon or witch or something that needs to be burned at the stake, or you might be extra tasty or something like that, or attracted by uh, more attractive to a monster who's attracted to magic or something like that. So then there's brawny, which is means you're beefy, you're big boned, uh, It gives you a +1 to your strength, and it gives you toughness. There's toughness isn't something that goes up and down or anything like that. It's just you either have it or you don't, and it adds 1 to your wound level. So strength can go up and well, it can go down too. It can go up and down. And it's a skill that can be rolled, like for lifting gates and breaking doors and things like that. The next thing is brilliant, and that gives you, and again, fairly self-explanatory. You're extra sharp. You're smart. You're naturally gifted in intellect. It represents a higher intellect and a sharp mind. It gives you a plus to learning lore, using your lore skill to learn things, and it gives you a plus to spell checks if you're a spell user. We'll get into that. Spell checks come a little later. So basically, all these do is give you bonuses to saving throws or certain skills or something like that. There's determination that helps with morale and saving throws. There's swift, which just that it makes you a little bit faster by giving you +1 to your movement rate. There's lucky that lets you re-roll 1 die per session. Um, there's perceptive, which gives you a bonus to detection rolls. There's zeal, which makes you more aggressive in combat, giving you a +1 to attack rolls. And there's insight, which is a form of empathy in this case, and that makes your character more effective in treating wounds. So it gives you a +1 in that regard. What do you think, Magenta?
I think these are all very good and balanced. I think where you have the, like in my case, I rolled and I got weird was one of the ones that I got. So I've got some additional advantages because of that. But um, especially living close to Brixia, it does put me in danger um, potentially for having that kind of aura about me that might attract the wrong kind of attention. Um, and I like the fact that you either have a skill or you don't, because I think sometimes it seems like in some of the games that I've seen, it's really just kind of like your character, rather than being like a character, like an actual person or resembling a person, your character is just a collection of skills and weapons.
Yeah.
And with a little veneer of a costume put on with, you got red hair or you got, whatever other attributes that are just kind of window dressing.
Mm-hmm.
And this to me feels more like actual person where, you might have something unique about you, uh, either for positive or for negative.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Good. So advantages. You heard us talk about it a couple of times. I believe it's next on the list. I don't want to get corrected
It
again. So,
is. Yeah.
okay. Um, yes. Advantages are similar to skills. They're a little bit harder to come by, uh, but you are born with some. Sometimes you can lose some, sometimes you can gain some. That largely is a function of whether the GM believes that it's warranted for what's going on, or you know, pretty much a decision that comes by them, with a few exceptions. Um, and if you don't get weird or don't pick it, you have one advantage and one disadvantage. To represent that, we're not always great at everything. There's always something we want to improve about ourselves. And the weird gives you the extra 2 advantages. But again, um, it doesn't come without the dangers and a price. So anyway, there's a large list. And the reason it's not that large, but it's large enough that I don't want to read it here and make the video any longer than it already has to be. Advantages are something that you can pick out unless the GM decides he or she wants to assign them. You're welcome to modify the list, obviously, if we're not couldn't stop you even if we didn't want you to do it. Once you buy the product, you can do what you want. But as a GM or DM, you might look at it and go, well, this doesn't fit my needs, so I'm going to change it, as it were. It's a good thing to have. All this does, beyond the constant, it fleshes out a character. It gives them more personality. It makes them a little bit more in depth. But it's how you start out with what you can do. It's a very skill based system. So this gives you some talents. This gives you some things that you can do right off the bat. This is all building blocks. So, um, and without using them all, I think that the ones that you do keep uh, don't play as strongly. They work better if all cylinders are firing. So you can pick them. Uh, we allowed Magenta to pick hers. I think she went for a very magical theme. If am not correct?
I did, because, I already knew I was a mage from before, so when I got to my advantages, I knew I wanted to have magic related, advantages, so I picked magical prodigy magical prodigy, which gives me an additional magical tome that I wouldn't be able to know, for, magic spells that I'd have access to, and then, endurance, which would cut the effects of fatigue in half for me. So, on a long road trip, would need less sleep and need less recovery time after using magic, that kind of thing. And then the other was raw power to recover, magical power points that I can use to enhance my spell effects.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if you decide to play a Star Wars type game with my rule system and you want to choose raw power, it is it is it, it isn't raw power in the Star Wars. It's unlimited power, of course.
All right, Darth Vader.
Right on. And so right. So what that does for her is it benefits her in giving her a larger inventory of magic to draw from as far as spells, with magic tomes being knowable. It increases Prodigy increases that by one, so that expands her arsenal. Endurance is applied to all sorts of things where fatigue affects you. Fatigue is a status. You can get it because you've gone too long without a rest. It can be inflicted upon you via magic, things like that. Endurance helps mitigate it. And like she said, the raw power gives her power points. In in the magic system here, it's based on kind of a power point or mana point. I didn't use the word mana because people kind of curl their lips at it these days, but uh, you spend points in either to first cast your spell, and then you can modify the spell by increasing range, increasing targets affected, even increasing damage in some cases, uh, by adding power points to it. This is a strategy. The more of your power that you put into one spell, the less spells you have for the rest of the day. So
And the more fatigued you might get as well,
possible
right?
as well. Yes, yes, that's possible as well. So it's a trade-off. Do I really want, do I need to really stick it to somebody and I'll use as much power as I can, or do I not and just see how? So it becomes a kind of a strategy thing. And as you gain in level, you'll gain in power points and mana. I keep using mana, and everybody says that not to use that; they don't like it anymore. But so it up to this point, a lot of people who play a lot of RPGs and are looking at this are probably thinking, "Boy, you really let these people get juiced up." Well, there's plenty of counterbalance to that, and the disadvantage that comes next is a great example. So you don't choose your disadvantages. The DM can assign them if he or she feels that that's in line with what they're trying to achieve as again, I know this is repetitive, but don't do that unless you really got something cooking that needs it. Try to do it randomly. It really is fun. It really works better that way. Um, so she got boned by a bad roll and got the disadvantage lame, which takes 2 off of her movement and 1 in combat penalties.
Which is why, going back to where we started before, and I know we talked about this when normally I would have the skill of sword fighting. I would not be a sword fighter with this disadvantage. So I would have, and oddly enough, the skill that I have is the one that caused me to have this disadvantage to begin with because I was kicked by a horse. So this is also why, if you look at the character, she is only, you can kind of see the injury to the leg. She's got a little damage to the calf. I mean, normally I don't think she'd be walking around barefoot like that, but
So just to be clear about the rule, right? That's true. But
yeah.
just to be clear about the rule, it doesn't prevent you from engaging in hand to hand or any type of melee combat just because you have lame. It gives you a -1 penalty. For her backstory, because she felt to flush it out, which is good, it's interesting, is that she was kicked by a horse as a adolescent. It was fairly severe, and it made the idea of sword fighting why
I wasn't able to learn it when all of the other courtesans were learning it because I had this infirmity.
right. But if you can be inflicted with the lame in other ways. It does it doesn't mean you can't sword fight or melee fight. It you know so just so you know. Um, but anyway, it's a fairly stiff one, and there's some of your counterbalance.
It does counter because I got lucky on some of the rolls. I mean, honestly, having weird and getting the other additional advantages. Well, I mean, it comes with its own disadvantage too, automatically to offset the extra advantage. But I mean, I feel like it did make me kind of powerful magically, and being a from a minor noble class, those kinds of things. I was feeling pretty good about my character, and then we get to the part where we're rolling the disadvantage, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
why couldn't I get like tone deaf or something? That would have been
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is on the list, tone deaf or can't sing, can't carry a tune, which
Mm-hmm.
is one I'm sure you don't want to get if you're a bard or something like that. So,
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
but anyway, moving
And
along.
finally, the motivations we were um, talking about that earlier because why would somebody who's so rich and in a life of luxury want to go out and do this sort of thing? Well, motivations are part of uh, how that gets explained. So you roll 5 motivations, and you determine how you're going to satisfy those motivations. Satisfied by completing. They're almost like little mini uh, quests, and if you um, satisfy them, you'll get a point, a destiny point, which can be used to re-roll any roll you want one time by expending it. So uh, you you get a somewhat basic statement, or maybe even a list of things as motivation. This is why we talk about doing things with the GM because you want to flesh them out. We'll give you an example. Uh, what she, without getting too verbose about it. Uh, one of her motivations was gambling addiction. Now, if you were a cleric or a priest or something, you may take gambling addiction, and as far as satisfying it is, you're out to eradicate it in anybody you see who has it. So you will stop what you're doing, or you will add in time to uh, be able to engage that person and try to get them um, cured from their addiction in gambling. And should you succeed in doing that, you might get the destiny point. With her, we decided that it would be an addiction that she suffers from. And in order to kick that habit, she has to make a saving throw with a -3 penalty uh, to avoid playing in any gambling game that she becomes in contact with, she can see going on or has knowledge of going on. Um, and if she passes that, then it goes to a -2 for the next time and a -1. When it hits 0, she's considered kicked of the habit and gets the destiny point. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So
One question too, and I know I have other ones on here that we're going to go over one by one. But say I kick my gambling addiction, is there? Can you create new motivations at that point? Can you continue to do them as you go along in the game, or is it just you have the 5, and that's when you've done the 5, you've you know
when when
made
you when you clear all 5 at your option, you can roll 5 new ones. Yes.
but you can't like roll a new one when you have 4 other ones left.
It, right.
Okay.
And this is I a lot of the rules, like I say, are guidelines, and they're malleable. Not this one. You don't do it any other way but that, or it becomes unbalanced and doesn't work right. Clear all
Right.
5, then re-roll 5 at your option, as long as the DM's okay with it.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then that gambling addiction could come back.
No, no.
No.
I mean,
Oh,
if the DM likes that sort of thing, because you can fall off the wagon, I get it. So yes, but you can avoid repetition should you desire, because
I see.
I get it. You again, I understand you can fall off the wagon, so that makes sense with the gambling addiction. But there'd be some where it might not make sense, or people just go, oh, I don't want to have to do it all over again. It feels like you've just completed a level only to have to repeat the level.
Right.
So that's why
But
yeah.
yeah, but to me that's kind of like it's like those if you get something out of it, it's kind of like a opportunity more so than like a burden, and the way I'm seeing it, because those destiny points could be the difference in a battle where you have a bad roll and you really need a chance to re-roll
Well,
it.
then
So yeah,
feel free to roll 5 more, but avoid
yeah,
duplicates.
right,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm.
And so going on, I don't want to spend too much time on my gambling addiction here. I'm gonna kick it, I swear. But yeah, I'll bet you money I kick it.
What?
Anyway,
Ah, waka
uh-huh,
waka waka.
right.
Yeah, I'm here
But
all
I
week.
also rolled that I have an inferiority
Okay,
complex.
let me address one other thing. The other thing is
Oh, sure.
people say, "Oh, if you're going to make me go play a game or go into a gambling, and now I don't have that's not player agency. That's railroading. You're forcing me to do this. Is look, if you're a cigarette smoker or have been in the past, you may have said to yourself how many times before you. Now, there's a lot of people. Every time I've talked to anybody who says they quit, they go, "Oh hell, I just threw them right out. I quit like that." And I know that 90% of the people that say they're full of shit. Pardon my
Mhm.
French. So, uh, and there's probably a time where you've thought, "I really ought to quit this." and then you've reached for another cigarette. And after emphatically stating your intention and your will to stop, and yet the will isn't there. And you know, uh, potato chips. I just one more, and then you grab three more.
You
That's
can't eat just one.
right. You can't stop eating those J's. So uh, that's your. It's not railroading. It's a model for certain things are
Right.
kind of subconscious stuff like that, and it generates a more interesting player than just having everybody be this Dudley do right badass who can't, having
Right.
flaws make interest.
Right.
So um, just want to address the people that go, that's railroading. I disagree completely. It's simply, you know, it's the
Well, I
same
mean,
as
and
it's the
these are
same as it's
optional as well, right? I mean,
that's
that
no, it's
you
not. No, you
no, I
have
mean, I mean, in the sense that if you don't want to try to do overcome the motivation problem, you just don't get the destiny point. I mean, it's if you
yeah,
just
I mean, you can ignore them, yes,
yeah, that's what I'm
that way,
saying. I
yeah.
mean, you're going to roll for them, but you could ignore them, but you're giving up on a chance to gain that destiny point, which could be a disadvantage later in the game. So, I
Uh,
I personally intend to complete these.
right. So, anyway, just quickly going through the rest. I just want to address that quickly, but
Hmm.
going over the rest, it wasn't overcome inferiority complex. It was just inferiority complex. Now, that one, people probably would go, well, how would you do it any different than overcoming an inferior? Well, okay. I mean, you're kind of right, but creativity can go in a lot of directions. Point is that you got two words. The rest that are written on this thing is comes from working with a GM to come up with a reasonable uh, goal to achieve based on what you've got for a motivation that isn't too easy or too hard.
Hmm.
So what we came up with is, and it's also fun to do it, and this is how you should do it, is make it contextual to the rest of the character's storyline or personality. So uh, we went back to the lameness. She didn't like being lame. That's a bummer. So the inferiority complex comes from the lameness. Okay. So the way I did this is as a GM, as her GM, I just started asking questions, basic ones. Okay, what makes you feel inferior more than anything else? Well, I don't know, and she kind of thought about it. She finally said, well, the lameness thing is, okay, well, and then I said, in what context do you have that feeling? Where was that in, you know, and finally we got to, well, dancing. I watch all the other courtesans dance with their suitors and all that stuff, and I can't do it because I got this gimpy leg. Okay, so there's where we went with that. So in order to overcome that inferiority complex, she's got to get out the dance floor. She's got a boogie on the disco round. So uh, that's how she's going to solve the inferiority
You
complex.
know, I just want to point out 75% of the people who are going to be listening to this do not know what boogie on the disco round means. Just want to point that out. For those of you who don't know what the heck he's talking about here, because you don't have as much gray in your beard, it's, yeah, I got to be able to dance or move or maybe even sword fight. I mean, it might not all be about the dancing, and I don't want to appear too shallow, but I do want to it's something that I feel ashamed about. In particular, I thought about this, and this is kind of the part I've always had trouble with the role playing is the getting into the character of like feeling what it is, and not that I always want to make it all about like acting out on the character, but whenever I'm creating them, I don't. get the inspiration for what should my character be like, and what, I come up with simplistic kind of backstories that are really kind of dry and dusty. This method has really made me feel like I got a character who has some actual personality, good and bad. Um, you know, some goals to work towards, opportunities for growth, opportunities for failure, all of it. So
Right.
it feels more like playing a person rather than just a Halloween costume, which
Right. Right.
yeah,
And
so fixing the lameness is my goal, partly to be able to dance and show all those courtesans who laughed at me while I was standing on the sidelines sipping punch while they were dancing with their uh, you know showing off their skills at the court, and I wasn't able to. So
okay. Right. So there you go. And
yep.
that's further exemplified. Her next role was contempt. Again, that one, some of these are more more detailed or more easy to understand or easy to work with than others. Some are purposely vague just to give what I wanted to see with just using one word is what can you and your GM come up with to make an interesting game out of that word or an interesting side quest and develop something that can be worked with. Now, there's some people out here, there'll be some people my age that are of a particular philosophy in gaming that'll be highly critical of this or hand wavy of it. Oh, you're railroading still. This is all railroading. Every time you come up with a story that I know, but just and no, what you're doing is you're you're creating a more interesting character, like she says, than just some meat puppet that you pilot around. And it's it's not railroading. It's this will create the phrase that they always invoke is you don't the story is playing the game. It's playing it out. And if you have all this stuff, you've already told the story. No, this is just a way to go out and get more story. And again, and a lot of it is to promote role playing because one of the things that I hated, and I had it happen um, every once in a while, and sometimes more than every once in a while, in certain things of the past, experiences, uh, is where you have an area of this of play where role playing, discussion, conversation between the characters isn't just a good idea. It's like it's kind of needed, and just have people that just don't do it, just sit there in silence, waiting for the next opportunity to roll to get into. I don't, like murder hobos, like they call it.
I knew
Tra-
you were gonna say murder hobos, I knew
yeah,
that. But,
yeah.
yeah, it is, and I think sometimes video games are partly to blame for that instinct that we all have because, that is kind of what, if you've grown up with video games, with, MMORPG, video game type styles, like Lord of the Rings, which I do love, but it does tend to put you in that mindset that it's all about attaining levels, attaining wealth, attaining new armor, attaining, these material things or accomplishments of just like how many kills did you get? Oh, wow. Did you see how many, I got all this loot or I collected this many broken sword sheaths or whatever to reach a goal rather than something that's more of a real role playing where you're actually playing a role, not just accomplishing mini tasks and side quests and hunter gatherer type stuff or crafting or those kinds of typical tropes. In this case, you have to do something that might require some psychological work, some conversations with other players to attain those kinds of things.
Mhm. And so with contempt, it can be somewhat shallow. And in this case, it kind of is. It's just those those mean girls from high school. I want to stick it to No, I
Well,
get
I
it.
think we've got pretty much a pretty fleshed out character. Is there anything else that we would, really do in character creation that we've overlooked at this point?
Yeah, there's one other thing to talk. Well, there's a couple, two things really. First is saving throws. Most
Oh,
people
yeah.
are aware of saving throws. If you're a veteran RPG, they're a fairly common mechanic. They're usually written down on a character sheet, and they tend to be, at least in the games that I play, like D&D. There's saving throw versus different attacks. I decided to so consolidate that. You just make a saving throw, and it can be modified by a variety of things. Um, but no matter what, it's one saving throw table, and
Okay.
you roll 3d6. The whole game is that much is stayed the same like D&D. You got 3d6. So if you get 14 or over, you've passed. If you've got 13 or under, you failed the saving throw. So, and
Okay.
again, there's a myriad of modifiers that can be applied to that roll depending on the situation.
I think I actually do because I'm determined I get +1 to saving throws.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Now, but again, you may have significant bonus or penalties coming your way based on what the attack is, like poison. It may not be very powerful poison, so there may not be any penalty. It's just make a saving throw versus poison. Or it may be some special extreme, like tarantula venom or whatever the hell. And it may, that's just something I pulled out of the hat, but something like that. Isn't there some blowfish or something in Japan
There
waters that
is the
are like the most,
pufferfish.
yeah, like something super hardcore versus, like a brown recluse has venom or poison or whatever, but it's not the same as a blowfish or a black widow or whatever. So they may have a different penalty applied based on their uh, potential amount of damage or lethality or something like that. So uh, that creates the whole system instead of having a bunch of here's it's save versus this is different and save versus that is different and they're different numbers and it's this whole big chart. I just wanted one chart and modifiers. It saves space and makes things easier.
So yeah, you only have to use the modifier if you are exposed to one of those extreme poisons.
Right. And it's
Right.
instead of a big look up table, you just got that. So it kind of saves things and shit like that. So, um, and then some of the basics, just want to get this across to people who are making a character. Uh, it's not really part of character creation, but the basics of the game, as far as if you're trying to attempt something that you don't have a complete guarantee of failure or a complete guarantee of success, and it isn't combat. It's a skill check. The whole thing is a skill based system, um, and you have easy, moderate, hard, and heroic skill. Her- Heroic means it's very hard to do, but you'll be very heroic if you do it. So, uh, and again, these are suggestions. The GM can tweak them based on his perception of the difficulty relative to these guidance numbers, which are real simple 5, 10, 15, 20. So easy is 5, moderate is 10, hard is 15, heroic is 20. You roll 3d6, you use add whatever benefits you have, whatever bonuses. Let's say you're a master swordsman, so you have a +5 in using your longsword. So if you're attacking, you roll 3d6 and you add 5. But there may be,
That's
modifiers,
okay.
right? There may, uh, if you're trying to lift a gate and you have a strength +3, you roll 3d6 and add 3. What's this? Is the gate super locked? Is it super heavy? What is it? Is it, the DM will say, well, he'll think, or she, will think, well, it's a moderate. It's a fairly heavy gate. It'd be a moderate difficulty for you to lift it. Okay, so I have to roll 3d6, add 3, and beat a 10. And
Well,
if I
that makes
do, then
sense.
I've lifted the gate. So
So
stuff like
that's
that.
why, like I have for perception, instead of having, oh, your perception is this plus a modifier, I just have a modifier because the
Exactly.
skill check's going to be based on the level of the difficulty, not on my level having to be different. And I just have that detection
Right.
bonus, detection +1, because I'm
Right.
perceptive.
Right.
I would just add that +1 to whatever I roll.
Right. And if you gain levels in that skill, perception is, in your case, is an attribute. It won't change, but you can get the skill, and the skill will change. Certain things, certain technology also might do it. For example, if
Right,
you're
like
it,
the detection is the skill. Perceptive is the attribute that I have,
right,
right?
right,
And then detection, I get +1.
yeah,
So if as I use detection more, I might increase that skill and get to +2.
right. There's, and I understand we're in a fantasy setting here, what we're talking about, but just to get the point across to people, say you were um, using night vision in the dark in your game, your that night vision would add perception potentially. Um, so that's how the skill check type of thing works, and that leads us lastly to the skills. You've gotten some skills at the beginning handed down to you from learning from your parents or your other dependents, and just things that you would think that you would pick up uh, living in the culture and the environment and under the and as the social class that you are,
Right.
maybe tools of the trade and stuff like that. So, what about other skills? I want to learn how to swing that sword. I want to be able to use that machine gun, whatever it is, reminding you that this game can not is not just about fantasy. So, uh, we have a simple system for that. You have a set of levels for each thing, five maximum. Some of them only go to three, but it's five maximum. Um, so uh, the first level of skill is untrained, and if you want a skill, you can learn it, or sometimes you can just try it. So let's say you're not a swimmer, you don't know how to swim, but you're being chased by a giant dragon called Tiamat, and you've got to get away by crossing a river or something. It's not the best scenario, but whatever. You're put in a
Yeah,
position
I'm
where you
gonna die if I don't know how to
right,
swim and I gotta cross a river. Probably
right.
gonna die.
You can try to swim even though you don't know how to, and you'll use the skill untrained at a -5 penalty. If you
Yeah, because I would likely die, so that makes sense.
mhm. So if you do make it, then you can consider yourself, and want to use the skill again. You can keep that skill if you pass with the -5 penalty, and then continue to use it.
What would I be using it at if I pass with my I'm assuming if I do it successfully, I wouldn't still be at a -5 penalty. What would I be at?
No, you would be until you get the next level, which would be
Oh,
novice.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
got you.
what you do is there may be a situation where because you're pressed, you have to do something that you're not trained in, and you don't necessarily want it as a skill, but you may have to try it because of a certain circumstance. Then you do it untrained, and if you pass, you pass. If you don't, you don't. Whatever happens, but you have the option of going, I want to learn more about that skill, and writing it down as on your skill list. Then you
I
have
see.
then you can go pursue education in it, or I better, or you can just continue to attempt it and after a couple of more successes, then you can move up.
Now,
So,
what if you fail at it? I mean, not with obviously, if you're trying to swim in a river and you fail, you're going to drown. But if it was something that was a skill like, I don't know, detecting or picking a lock, because you're not going
mm,
to die if you fail necessarily. I mean, you might, in some depends on the lock you're picking and why. But if say it's just you're trying to pick a lock on a chest, and if you fail, you just don't get the goodies inside the chest. But does can you still add it to your list of skills? Or I mean, how does it work when you fail, I guess, is the question. So I attempt
it
to pick the lock and I fail. What happens then?
so if it's something like if you're asking if you're trying to train or learn something and you fail in your attempt to learn it, is that what you're asking?
Well, like, okay, so say for instance, we're all out adventuring and I am away from the group for some reason or another. I'm not a thief or anything, so I'm not trained in lock picking, but I come across this chest that looks like it might have treasure in it. And I decide, since I can't get with any of my rest of my team or find my actual thief, I give it a go. And I fail, I can't get into the chest. Can I then write lockpicking as one of the skills that I want to learn and put it on my skill list, just like, if I successfully had done it? Or like, does my failed attempt count towards progress in learning the skill, or give me the option to try to learn the skill or not?
It it doesn't prevent you from trying to learn the skill if you choose to.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, if I think I'm sorry. I'm not
I
trying to.
no, I you just kind of mentioned that you can add the skill and then you can try and get training in it. And I'm assuming every attempt that you make at it, you might get closer to actually learning it. But if those attempts are all failures, do you still learn it? Do you learn from your failures as well as your successes?
Oh,
Yeah.
if you're trying to learn, yes, you will get some credit for attempting, irregardless of success or failure. S- But success is better than failure. Yes,
So you learn
but
faster from success, but you would still learn something from your failures.
yes,
Like the old saying goes, that Edison, after failing to make a light bulb multiple times, he said, "I haven't failed. I've just successfully discovered 99 ways that don't work."
yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this is unlike a lot of other games. There's no class levels. There's no, thousands of experience points to add up or any of that stuff. Um, you level just by doing, and you don't have to count. You don't have to do math. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's counting, but there's not math. I've done it this many times. Okay, how many times for failure? How many times for success? That that's enough, in my opinion. Hash marks instead of mathematical symbols. Am I making
Right.
this clear? I'm afraid I'm not
Yes.
making it
No,
clear.
it makes sense. So the
Okay.
more you do something, the more you likely you are to learn it. If you learn it quickly, you'll learn it quickly if you are good at it. If
Mm-hmm.
you're not as good at it, might take you a little longer, might take a few more attempts until you get good at it. But
Mm-hmm.
with practice, anybody can learn just about anything unless it's, totally beyond their skills. Like, I mean, I might even be able to learn to dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like this as a way of, it also kind of makes it so that your character doesn't necessarily, I mean, not that I would say a mage should ever try to become a thief, But if you're out there and you're doing stuff and like you're ending up in a situation like with the lock picking, where maybe you come across it frequently enough that you attempt it. If your thief is there, you're going to say, "Hey, you got the skills to pick the lock. Go ahead." But maybe you find yourself in some circumstances where you have an opportunity to learn additional skills that are a little bit out of your normal wheelhouse. You're not really prohibited from that, right? You could be, I wouldn't want to say a jack of all trades kind of player, but you might be a well-rounded player where you have a couple additional skills. Maybe you're a mage, but you can also cook or
Mm-hmm.
use a bow
Mm-hmm.
and arrow or something like that. You're
Right.
not strictly, just like regular people, you're not strictly limited to just one thing. You don't have to be just a one trick pony.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. I like the idea of having the ability to customize. That's why I like skill based systems. I think it allows more customization. I don't want to see this. Just I'm a magic user too. Oh, so we both, some of these games, a magic user's got the same book of spells. Yeah, you can choose different ones and all that sort of stuff, but they're really become carbon copies of one another because there's no different. Like there isn't a bunch of different paths. Like I don't. We use Lotro as an analogy, and if people don't play it, but like Lotro, uh, you you're you're a champion, but you have three different trees that you go through for skills. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Right. You could focus on having a large attack area of effect attack where, you're specialized in being able to, swing that sword and hit three or more people at once. Or you might be, you know, capable of like calling away enemies from the other players. So you're drawing that aggro to you so that the other, weaker characters are not going to get squished, as easily. Or you could focus on, well, I don't play a champion, so I'm not as good.
Right,
I can tell
but the
you,
point, right? The point is that they're not all the same. Now that game,
right,
there's only three, so it's like you're one of the three. But in this game, with a large variety of different types of skills, you can be a lot closer to being very different than this. As opposed, I just like the variety.
right.
So that, mhm. But yeah,
Yep.
it's
Oh,
qualitative experience. It's not XP. Basically, instead of giving out XP, 5 XP or 1500 XP at the end of session or something like that, like most of these games do, um, it's just counting how you used it. For example, in the session where Nine Finger Pete, the thief, killed two orcs with a dagger, lied to a guard, courted a tavern wench, caroused in a tavern, lost at gambling, and pickpocketed a nobleman. It doesn't matter if the attempt was a success or failure. Both count. Maybe not the same, but both count. What matters more is that the actions had consequences. Sometimes we
right.
learn from our mistakes, and the GM will award you based on those usages.
I kind of like that too because one thing I've always had, and maybe I'm a very literal person in a lot of ways, so I kind of think of things logically and literally. And one of the things that I've noticed with like some of the games, like where you level up, right, and you go from being level 14 to level 15, and all of a sudden all of your skills improve, even if you only really use one of them. But you just immediately level up all of your skills. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't really seem reasonable to me. If all I've been doing is banging away at enemies with a bow, then why did my trapping skill increase? or why can I run faster all of a sudden? You know, I didn't really work on those things, but all of a sudden I have those skills too.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So, and I like that. So, and you, uh, progression isn't always through adventuring, though. I like to do this too. Now, uh, you can a character can also learn skills and abilities and spells by training. It's slower and it costs money, um, but it can work to your advantage in some cases too. For example, a mage may spend time in the classroom or a library studying a certain, maybe dimensional planner lore or whatever it is, in order to achieve the next level, or maybe two levels or something like that.
Now, how does that work when you're like all part of a group? Does everybody have to go together, or do you like separate from the group and then you kind of run a game where there's two tracks? Like, this is what's going on at, you know, uh, this is going on at home, or I
Right.
don't know. Can you kind of go over that with me?
Well, it's an old school, and I hate to use that term because it's fallen out of favor and all that sort of stuff, but it really ends up, it's kind of been this way now, where newer people don't buy into this. But the way we played, and I'm old, so I made a game based on my experiences. So we had things like henchmen, relations. That's why you have dependents. Dependents aren't just, you know, they may be blood relations. Um, so we had hirelings, henchmen, relations that might go with us. We didn't, like you start out as a party of maybe three or five, but usually we had more people. That tends to be the thing with gaming these days. RPG is the parties between 3 and 5 people, and a lot of people say any more and it's unmanageable. That sort of thing. That's where we started out when it was me and my two buddies that bought the game to start with, and we were just learning. Then we found other people that played. We would play in larger groups because there's safety in numbers. So, um, and then you could hire people. So we would hire, like old veteran soldiers or something like that were turned mercenary or something, and go into these dungeons and things with 30 different characters. Most of them were NPCs or whatever, but we weren't trying to tackle this stuff, just a handful of us. That's how you get your ass killed. So, um, what does this have to do with what you brought up as a question? Is
Mm-hmm.
you have a pool of players and NPCs that are working with you all the time, or most of the time. So if you have a character that is going into training, and that takes some time, they're parked in that spot and training. You have a catalog, a stable of other characters that you can use and play with until the main one comes back. Just again, I know we keep using Lotro, and for people who are watching and don't know, but I'm sure that most MMOs are similar in that you can have more than one avatar. And for whatever reason, you may log into a second avatar. Think of it somewhat as that. But in this case, um, you're all part of the same party on the same adventure, potentially, or usually at least. Is any of this making sense? I'm keep
Yeah.
asking this, folks, because I don't know if I'm rambling or you know it's late.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I do want to clarify for anybody who doesn't know what LOTRO is. It's Lord of the Rings Online, because we keep using the acronym, and I am a I hate
Sorry.
acronyms myself, and I was doing it too. But I just wanted to make sure we clarify so everybody knows what that game is. But it is very much a massive multiplayer online role playing game. So um, it it has a lot of the elements represented in computer fashion, which That's one of the things that I like about real, actual human level interactive play is that it doesn't have to be all about the numbers. It doesn't have to be about going out there and grinding against shooting enemies and collecting treasure until you see that little blue progress bar go away and you get to the end and you get to the next level and all of a sudden all of your skills have improved, even in the ones that you never ever used because I don't really need to check for shadow passing shadow evil things or I'm not using desperate flight because I'm a better player than that. Whatever it is. But it it makes more sense to have human interactive stories where you're kind of using all of the real role playing parts of it rather than just going through the motions.
Right, right. It's I agree. And that's what this was made of. That's why this character creation is the way it is. It's more of a really building a person as opposed to rating a avatar. In a lot of games, that's all you're doing is rating an avatar. Here's my avatar. Here's what he looks like. Isn't he cool? Let's roll a bunch of die and say, oh, he's got this unrelatable number that represents this. Rinse, repeat, keep rolling. Whereas
Right.
what I wanted to see is somebody who's, um, I even have for people who are new. This is not this is optional, and it's recommended for beginners. People like I've gone to people and say, "Hey, you want to play a role playing game?" They go, "I wouldn't even know where to start. I'm not an actor. I don't even know. I wouldn't know how to play the thing. I wouldn't know how to act." They hear or they see the word role, and they think of thespian. You know,
Yeah.
they think of actors. Um, so I have a list of personality traits as training wheels for those people. Well, don't think about it. Just here, let's roll some up. You're playing your character is a grouchy but good-hearted old miser or something like that. Now you know how to play it. Be Scrooge McDuck, you know.
Right.
So, um,
And I like that too because even if I was old hat at playing these games, if when I get to the level where I can call myself a veteran, which I'm not there by any means, and I don't want to claim or anybody think I'm claiming to be. I'm just learning as I go. But I will say that it's hard when you haven't ever done it before because what I was doing and probably will do because I'm the kind of person who I order the same thing off the Chinese menu from the Chinese delivery menu every time I order. It's always the same thing. I don't vary it. So my characters were all the same. And they all had pretty much the same characteristics. So there was no variation. There was no stretching to try out different things and see how I liked them or explore different aspects of the character creation. And if you asked me, I would just draw a blank. Well, I don't know what else I would be if I wasn't this elf hunter that I always roll up every single time. So, I don't know how to play anything else. And I'm afraid to try because I'm already new and unsure of myself. So, what do I do with that? And those kinds of things I think are barriers to entry for people who are new, interested in role playing, but are new to it, especially if you didn't get a chance to do it when you were younger and you're going back to it because it's something you feel like I missed out on that and I always wanted to. And that's kind of the position I'm in. Um, so having something that kind of helps you develop that creative part of it and enjoy that, which is, I think, the heart of what it was really always about. Um, it's I want to say thank you for doing it that way because it helps with folks like myself. And I think it's already hard. Sometimes I noticed like I tried to go online. Now this was way back in the day when computers had AOL on them. If anyone ever remembers those discs, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're young and that's great. I'm happy for you. Enjoy your youth while you have it. But but I
For
remember
sure.
like trying to, yeah, I remember like trying to go into forums where people were discussing it. And boy, was it just everybody's talking over your head and it's nothing but acronyms. And I had no idea what was going on. And if you admit that you aren't a veteran at it, that you don't know what to do, there's mockery and what are you doing here? No noobs. And, it's just like, get out of here. So it's kind of like, you know, if the game is going to grow and flourish and people are going to continue to enjoy these things, there really has to be some attempts to welcome in people who haven't done it before, who don't really know how to do it. Make it accessible, make it interesting, and keep it going and flourishing. My rant's over. Sorry.
Right on, right on. So, um, I hope this was clear. Uh, and if it's not, we'll go back and address whatever wasn't. This was our first attempt at this kind of content, so please have mercy. Uh, you know, they're just like these games. There's a first time for everything. You know, and you get better as you progress, as you try more of it. So, I think it went fine, but I know it was my first time, so I know that there's, you know what I mean.
Right. Absolutely. Well, everybody's got to start somewhere. And so I think it's a good start. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm finding a lot of useful things. I'm um I'm hopeful that we'll have some players who want to actually, take it to the next level after creating some characters to go into the actual gameplay, and go through all of the rest of it too, like how to work out the battle resolution and all of the other things that are part of the role playing. So that'll come as we get along. But for this one, if you guys have listened to this all the way till now, thank you for listening. Please make sure that you like, share, subscribe, tell a friend so we can grow this. And if you have any comments, questions, constructive criticism, please be constructive, but we'd be happy to hear from you. Just leave a comment below. And thank you guys for listening.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone, and happy gaming.